Hello everyone. Our topic this week was requested by Sinister Obliteration, all caps. We'll be going over Julius Belmont from the Castlevania series.
So first things first, for those of you who have seen our Castlevania Lord of Shadows videos, it's very important to note that those games take place in an alternate continuity from the primary Castlevania games. And Julius, the subject of our video today, is from the primary Castlevania continuity, meaning that they have nothing to do with each other. So if anything in this video seems to infer contradictions with our Lord of Shadows videos, that's why.
So, Julius is a Belmont, and based upon the games, he's not only the chronologically most recent, but as no further upcoming Castlevania games have been announced as of the writing of this video, and he had no known progeny, he is also the last of the Belmont line. In the primary continuity, the Belmont clan, as we're familiar with them, has been around since just before the 1100s, with the chronologically earliest game set in the 1090s. Since that time, it has been the Belmont family's self-proclaimed duty to combat the Dark Lord Dracula, attempting to kill him time and again as the centuries pass. Many Belmonts over the years have slain Dracula, but as Dracula is, in the simplest terms, the personification of evil and chaos in the Castlevania reality, he always returns to life decades or centuries later. Sometimes the Dark Lord would return under his own power, and at other times his followers or unrelated fanatics would attempt to enact rituals to revive him prematurely. These rituals failed as often as they succeeded, but if they failed, it was usually because a Belmont rose up to stop them, and if the ritual succeeded, there was usually a Belmont there to put Dracula down again once he had risen.
Julius's story is tied oddly closely to that of one of his predecessors by the name of Richter Belmont. Richter's story occurred in the 1790s. Among other things, Richter was considered the most powerful Belmont of his time, and it is inferred, the most powerful Belmont to ever have lived up until that point. He slew Dracula, saved everyone, but a few years later fell under the mental domination of one of Dracula's servants, one that Richter was certain he'd killed. Under this servant's influence, Richter revived Dracula early. Richter was eventually cleansed of his corruption, and Dracula was slain with the help of Dracula's son Alucard and others. However, in the wake of these events, the Belmont family faded into obscurity for a few centuries, and their family weapon, the vampire killer, which we'll talk about more shortly, passed into other hands for use in safekeeping. Most information we can find doesn't give a reason for the Belmont clan's disappearance from history, nor the reason that they gave up the vampire killer. One source claimed that as a result of the corruption inflicted upon Richter, his family was somehow forbidden from taking up the weapon for a time, but we could find no other sources to corroborate this, so take that bit of information with a grain of salt.
Regardless of the hows or whys, the Belmonts would return to the stage of history sometime after 1980, when Julius Belmont himself was born. Nostradamus, a real-life historical figure who claimed to be able to predict the future and published literally thousands of supposed prophecies, prophesied an eclipse in 1999. That is all actually true. You can look it up. This guy published zillions of prophecies. He also published things like cooking instructions for jams. The 1500s were weird. Other prophecies regarding the year 1999 are taken in the Castlevania continuity to predict the return of Dracula. Both predictions turned out to be true. Julius's story will also involve an eclipse that occurs in 2035, and tertiarily one that occurs in 2017. Because of the way solar eclipses work, we can actually predict them in real life, and have been able to do so with a fair degree of accuracy since all the way back to Nostradamus' time. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. So it's worth noting that the game developers took the time to select actual dates for real solar eclipses that have happened in regards to the 1999 and 2017 eclipses, or will happen in regards to the 2035 eclipse, and that all of these eclipses are part of the same solar eclipse cycle, because yes, that's apparently a thing, which we actually think is really, really cool.
Born so close to the prophesied return in 1999, Julius was presumably trained from a young age to be a fully fledged vampire hunter, as had all his notable ancestors before him. We say presumably because very little is known of Julius's life prior to 1999. But we do know that by the time the eclipse arrived, Julius was trained and ready. As a member of the Belmont clan, Julius possessed a number of abilities, both trained and naturally gifted. By this point in time, the Belmonts had a magical lineage, and we know that Julius specifically was capable of wielding magic. We note this because the Belmont clan's capabilities in general, and most of the abilities of their various members in particular, are very ill-defined. Some may be straight-up magic, others may be skill and training, while still others are likely both. Julius possesses unnatural jumping capabilities, able to double jump and clear distances several times his height. He's a very skilled melee combatant, able to fight with both a variety of Castlevania series standards, such as holy water, throwing axes, and battle crosses, in addition to being proficient in unarmed combat. He can perform a phasing dash that allows him to pass through enemies or obstacles while repositioning for the fight. He can sense evil and the presence of dark power, specifically that of Dracula himself. He's incredibly resistant to most damaging elements in his games, and is also very swift, fast on his feet and on the attack. Julius is also capable of enacting powerful holy magics, able to summon a mystical cross of pure holy fire that sucks foes in and burns them with holy flames. This attack is so powerful that the castle around Julius was left crumbling in places in the aftermath. Finally, Julius wields the Vampire Killer. The Vampire Killer is a mystical whip wrapped in layers of alchemical and holy enchantments specifically designed to be able to slay any and all vampires, but is also capable of ending the life of any evil being. It is arguably the most powerful weapon in a Belmont's arsenal, and is usually considered the only weapon capable of killing Dracula, and even then only in the hands of a Belmont. Others either can't access the whip's full power or pay a heavy price to do so. However, if that price is paid, the Vampire Killer is just as deadly as if it were wielded by a Belmont. Lastly, it's worth noting that, like Richter before him, Julius was considered the most powerful Belmont of his time, and thus possibly the most powerful Belmont ever. He was also the first known Belmont since Richter to take up the Vampire Killer in combat against Dracula.
In 1999, at about the age of 19, Julius, along with Alucard and others, including a host of Shinto practitioners, laid siege to Castlevania, Dracula's castle. It's at this point we need to include another interesting piece of information from real life. According to Shinto myth, the first solar eclipse occurred after a disagreement between the sun goddess and the god of the sea. The sea god, under the guise of bidding the sun god, his sister, farewell before he left for the sea, tore up her place and even relieved himself in the middle of her palace. In response, the sun goddess hid herself away in a cave, plunging the world into darkness with the disappearance of the sun. This was the first solar eclipse. According to Julius's games, it was believed that by hiding away, the sun goddess was able to contain the sea god's anger. Resultantly, eclipses are thought to have the power to contain anger and evil intentions. Keeping this in mind, in the battle with Dracula, Julius's Shinto allies sealed Castlevania, which in addition to being his castle was also a quasi-living entity and the physical source of Dracula's chaos powers, including the ability to regenerate after death, away inside of the solar eclipse, which effectively sealed away much of Dracula's power. Because of this, when Julius killed Dracula this time, Dracula died for good. For the first time ever, Dracula was considered completely and truly dead, and in the aftermath, Julius sealed the Vampire Killer away inside of the already sealed away castle in an effort to weaken Dracula's powers even further. The idea presumably being the mystical equivalent of a double tap to make sure that Dracula stayed dead permanently.
And this is where the games actually begin. Julius appears in Castlevania Aria of Sorrow and its sequel Dawn of Sorrow. Unusually for a Belmont, however, Julius is not the primary playable character in either of these games. Instead, the protagonist is a young man named Soma Cruz, born during the Eclipse in 2017. So he's a 2-year-old now. Despite Dracula's presumed permadeath, someone or something like him needed to exist in order to balance out the universe. Very literally, in the Castlevania reality, God was the avatar of all things good and lawful, and for the natural balance of the world, there had to exist an opposite, an avatar of all things evil and chaotic. For roughly the last 1,000 years, that had been Dracula, and without that balance, nature was getting out of whack, and trying to fill the void left by his demise. Soma Cruz was fated to fill that void, as he was born the reincarnation of Dracula. Unaware of this, Soma led a normal life until the eclipse of 2035, when he and several others found themselves transported inside of Castlevania, locked away inside of the eclipse.
It's here that we first encounter Julius in-game, learning the rest of this information along the way, partially in tandem with Julius himself. It turns out that something about the events of the war with Dracula in 1999 left Julius without his memories, and he had wandered the world since as an amnesiac, searching for his identity and story. Keep in mind, he did this for about 36 years. The man was now 55 by the time of Aria of Sorrow, He had spent nearly 2/3 of his life without his pre-Dracula memories. That sucks. However, chance and gut instincts had guided him to Castlevania once the Eclipse started, and subjecting himself to the castle and to the dark energies growing within Soma, who was a decent kid but, had the power and soul of the Lord of all Evil inside of him, eventually helped Julius regain his memories. Once his faculties had been restored, he was able to apply the knowledge gained in his vampire hunter training to realize that Soma was Dracula reborn, and so, when Soma's power fully awakened, Julius stood to fight him. Armed once more with his vampire killer, Julius took a mighty gamble. He could feel the good, innocent, human soul of Soma fighting the darkness of Dracula growing within him. And so, Julius rolled the dice. Rather than fighting Soma at full power, and holy crap, castle-cracking fire crosses aren't him at full power, Julius held back during the fight, challenging Soma, but letting him win, both to test Soma's resolve, and then to test his humanity. In the aftermath, Soma refused to kill Julius and set off to try and sever or destroy the source of chaos, and thus Dracula's evil power, deeper within the castle. If he was successful, it was the only way to save Soma's soul. If he failed, he would become Dracula's reincarnation in truth. Soma recognized that Julius had held back in the fight, and so made the old Belmont promise that if Soma failed and fell to evil, that Julius would come and kill him so as to prevent Dracula's evil from spreading. Julius promised to do so, but also assured Soma that he had faith in him. Faith that turned out to be well-placed. Soma cleansed his soul, and everyone returned from the weird Eclipse prison where Castlevania still remained. Julius, proud of what Soma had managed to do.
1 year later, a cult of fanatics who were really freaking out about the whole reality being out of balance thing attempted to bring Dracula back once again, either by corrupting Soma or empowering a handful of other possible reincarnation candidates. This is the setting for Dawn of Sorrow. Independently of one another, Soma and Julius arrived at the cult's headquarters to try and handle things. When they meet up early in the game, Julius encourages Soma to leave and let he, Alucard, and company handle this, since Soma's corruption was part of the cult's plans, meaning that Soma's continued presence endangered literally everyone present. Obviously, as the protagonist, Soma refused, and the two parted ways, dividing and conquering, trying to track down the cult's leaders before Dracula raising shenanigans could occur. Julius spends most of this game telling Soma to go home because his presence is too great a risk, but during the final portion of the game, he ends up being grateful Soma didn't listen. Dawn of Sorrow employs a magical seal mechanic, with bosses and some doors requiring the player to slap magical seals on them in order to permo-kill the bosses or open the doors, respectively.
Due to shenanigans in-game, if a magic seal is not applied to a boss, it will regenerate itself, presumably forever, meaning that the only way Soma can kill the bosses is with a magic seal. Despite having to battle similar opponents, it is discovered, near the end of the game, that Julius does not possess the ability to conjure magic seals, and he had instead simply been destroying his enemies too quickly to allow them to regenerate, a testament to Julius's capabilities. However, that power turned out to be insufficient to overpower one of the other possible Dracula reincarnations. As such, without Soma's help, Julius would likely have perished, since the Dracula candidate in question could theoretically have regenerated forever without Soma's sealing powers.
Soma's presence proved a further boon during the final stages of the game. Early on, they encountered a powerful magical seal, but so great was its strength that they couldn't determine what was on the other side, and the only person who could break it was Julius. The problem was that doing so would sap the vast majority of Julius's power, meaning if something horrible were beyond, he'd be next to useless in a fight. So they left the seal alone and continued their search. By the end of the game, it's revealed, surprise, surprise, that they need to get through that seal to go after the cult leaders and stop them from fully reincarnating Dracula. 'Cause duh. So Julius breaks the seal, lamenting about the burdens of growing old afterward, which hints at the possibility that he may have been able to carry on with the fighting even after such a display of power back in his younger days. Thankfully for everyone, Soma was there to pick up the slack, and he and Alucard passed through the now broken seal to do battle with the cultists on the other end, with Julius putting the faith in the young man once again. Soma emerged victorious, and they all escaped from the castle as it collapsed, later sharing some heartfelt laughter and banter as Julius, Soma, and their other allies celebrated the fact that everyone had lived through not one, but 2 brushes with Dracula in less than 2 years.
And that's basically the story of Julius. Last of the Belmonts and true slayer of Dracula, since apparently reincarnation doesn't count as coming back. We hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please leave us a like, and maybe share it with someone you think might be interested. If you have ideas for more videos you'd like to see us do in the future, do like Sinister Obliteration, all caps, and let us know in the comments down below. If you'd like to see more videos from us in the future, be they lore or let's play, go ahead and hit that subscribe button.
In the meantime, this has been True Masters and Morons, signing off. Thanks for watching this video. If you want to see more like it, hit this subscribe orb.
To see our last Let's Play, click or tap the link on the right.
For our last lore video, go to the link on the left.
And for a video chosen by the gods of YouTube from our channel, hit that link on top.
Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.